Welcome back to Memory Protection. It's an Apple News podcast set 20 years ago. Today, we're looking back to June 2001. I'm Josh McGrath, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Matt Smith.
What's up?
Hey, Matt, I had a question for you this month.
Sure, bud.
What's the plural of Tim Berners-Lee?
It would be Tim Berners-Lee's, right?
Tim's Berners-Lee's.
Tim's
Berners-Lee.
Tim's Berners-Lee's with the apostrophe on
let's semantically satiate this. Tim's Berners-Lee's, Tim's Berners-Lee's, Tim's Berners-Lee's, Tim's Berners-Lee's, Tim's Berners-Lee, Tim's Berners-Lee.
It's got weird.
Now, what's our next step?
Follow-up, baby. We got a little bit of follow-up. Listener Tim following up from last month's episode where Josh mentions micro worlds and animating a turtle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which you were very dubious about.
I wasn't dubious. I just wasn't familiar.
Okay.
But Tim shed some light. Tim says, I also grew up on micro worlds and turtle programming as well. You missed out. But while micro worlds is still around, I would also check out Scratch. Scratch is kind of a spiritual successor to Microworlds and is based on Seymour Papert's principles. So I know a little bit about Scratch. I've used it a little bit. I've used it with my daughter a little bit. We've haven't gotten too deep into it, but I'm familiar with sort of the principles that Seymour Papert was talking about and what you were talking about last month. And then I looked into Seymour Papert a little bit more. What a cool dude.
Yeah, I wish I had Scratch instead of Microworlds. Honestly, Scratch seems very much more approachable than even Microworlds was. Microworlds was literally programming. With like go-to statements and everything, I think. But it was simple. But Scratch is really like it's like a visual like block-based programming, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I actually played with it when Tim sent that email, and I got my little cat to move a little bit when I move the keyboard. It's super simple and it's really intuitive. I mean, I know I'm a little bit familiar with it, so I kind of knew what to expect, but I think you can actually have like tangible results within minutes as opposed to sort of like learning how to write. You can just sort of delve into conceptual things.
I have to admit, I've never really used Scratch because I'm not a baby, so I do real
Wow.
No. I've never done Scratch. I feel like I'm missing out because it sounds really cool. And I mean, I don't know, hopefully I'll be able to use it with someone else someday. We'll see.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. We got some additional follow-up. If you stayed for the after show last week, stay for the after show this week so you can hear about my thoughts on Karnov for the NES.
Come for the Apple history. Stay for the drama.
Stay for the Karnov.
All right, moving on to QuickTime Machine.
Leading our QuickTime Machine this month, Walt Mossberg likes that new iBook.
What's he like about it?
Yeah, it looks pretty good. Kind of attractive in a way that
he says it looks like the PowerBook's little brother.
Svelte, prone to scratching, which is kind of a drag, but the price is good.
Speaking of PowerBooks, the G4 Titanium's just got a firmware update.
Yeah, now they can read DVDs better.
There's a lot of that going around.
Well, it's new technology, the Super Drive. Gotta make sure it works. Josh, remember episode 3?
Yeah, Revenge of the Sith.
the best Star Wars movie?
Yeah, I mean, undeniably. It's basically like Paddington.
What? Is Paddington good?
I mean, it's better than Citizen Kane, apparently.
According to who?
Everyone.
What?
Yeah, we'll put the link to Paddington's Rotten Tomatoes reviews.
Okay.
In the show notes.
This will be enlightening for the listener as well as me.
There was this whole thing where Paddington 1 and 2 are, have 100% reviews or ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. And they unearthed like one bad review from back in the day of Citizen Kane. So now its score dropped. So now it's no longer
Oh my God.
the highest rating movie. And now it's Paddington 1 and 2. I've never seen them, but I think I should. I think they're pretty good, apparently.
I know that my daughter liked them.
Well,
I don't remember them.
Give them another look.
Maybe. Anyway, all the way back in episode 3 of Memory Protection, we talked about Future Power. You remember what Future Power did?
Oh, they did a terrible crime.
They
were the Samsung of their day.
Yeah. But unfortunately, they didn't have enough money.
Yes, Future Power was sued by Apple for making a basically an iMac clone.
Right.
Not basically, literally an iMac clone, but running Windows. And Apple won the case. And
well, they settled.
They
didn't win.
Okay.
Yeah. So the sort of injunction that was brought against Future Power was in effect until 2004, and this prevented Future Power from selling its iMac clone.
Ostensibly, by then it would be, the world would have moved on, right?
I think that's the idea. And I mean, the world does move on in January. So
right. We'll check back in 2024 to see if future computing is making G4 iMacs. Next, good news for Phil Schiller.
Yeah, now Phil can play Quake 3 Arena in OS X.
Without, resorting to heroic ports by the Omni Group.
Right. This is now a legit sanctioned port, although probably based on whatever Omni Group did, I would assume.
And what version of Mac OS X would you like to run that on?
Probably the new one, 10.0.4. Wouldn't be another month without a new point update from Apple. Apple's fixing bugs left and right.
In a major way. Users are reporting a much snappier Finder, and some people are seeing better dock performance.
That's good news.
John Siracusa should be happy. Spoilers, he wasn't.
That's QuickTime Machine.
All right, what Apple event are we talking about this month?
None Apple event.
None.
There's no Apple event this month, Josh. I'm sorry. I don't know if you got the show notes, but we got nothing.
I read the show notes. What are you talking about? This is what happens when we skip them. We skipped forward and we already did WWDC.
I know. Well, I mean, we did skip an empty month in April, so.
Okay, well, because there's not any real big Apple news this month, Matt and I looked back to the old list of topics. We said, what would be good context for the show? And there's one big thing we haven't really covered all that much.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about it, but we haven't really dug into it.
You're talking about the internet.
What is it?
What is it?
What is it?
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
What does it do?
What am internet?
How does it work?
What is the plural of Tim Berners-Lee?
Tim Berners-Lee's.
Yes. Today we'll be talking about the internet. It's
really something else.
I think it's really going places. Listen, I'm just going to start with the disclaimer. This is a really huge topic, and we're not going to cover everything.
Yeah.
We're just sort of going to have a conversation about how the internet started, how it developed, became the World Wide Web, and touch on what Apple's role in that was, and then maybe look to the future for a bit. But we're not going to be comprehensive because
we're not that smart.
Exactly. Networked computers have existed for a really long time, almost as long as computers have existed, because there's always been this need to share data, right? Because your alternative was, as it is today, sharing physical media, right?
Sure.
Removable media. And that's
got to take that disk from one computer to the other.
Got to take that 1-ton drum disk,
Yeah.
put it on a cart and move it somewhere else. Right. It's not feasible. And so there were very early networks that were basically point to point. And of course, there was this idea of like multiple terminals connecting to one computer, right? And they developed this idea of like time sharing computers, right? Especially in university and research contexts.
Right. The dumb terminals connecting to the actual CPU somewhere else.
Let's say you were a researcher in one of these communities. You would have colleagues who were in a similar field or a similar community who also had access to a point-to-point network. And you would obviously sometimes like to share information with them, right?
I got to share my new paper.
Right. You got to share your new paper. There's this... well,
cool.
it's just
cool
paper.
GIF I want to show.
It's this cool GIF. I have this cool 50s meme I'd like to show you. It's real boffo.
It's really top drawer.
Yeah, it's the bee's knees. I'd love to share it, but unfortunately our networks don't connect. So, ergo, this idea of what if we could connect these networks started to form in these researchers' minds.
Right.
And people started to think about how could we do this?
Taking these local networks people were using and then connecting those across longer distances.
So you could, for instance, have a local network, local area network, and connect more and more computers to that. But if you wanted to connect to a wider, say, other networks, you start getting into a realm where you start calling that a wide area network. Not being able to connect all these computers was inconvenient, but it was also a huge...
Infuriating.
It was infuriating, but it was also a huge military threat.
Sure.
Because computers became more and more important they've always been important. That's why computers are around. Is for the military, or that's why they were initially developed, right? Was for doing calculations and storing data. That became a more and more important use case. And the idea that like even the network computers were so fault intolerant, if you destroyed one site, they're like, we need a way to be able to access information in a way that's nuke proof, basically.
Sure. Yeah. So in August of 1962, a gentleman by the name of J.C.R. Licklider, he envisioned a globally interconnected set of computers so that everybody could access data and programs from any site. He called it a galactic network.
Make it so.
Number one. So the Licklider was at ARPA, Advanced Research Projects Agency.
Right.
Which became the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
They're the ones who make the dancing robots that people kick.
Yeah, and the dogs that are going to kick us back eventually. So then around the same time, a bunch of people there was, I think, 3 or 4 researchers all kind of coming up with the same sort of idea. And Leonard Kleinrock at MIT published the first paper on packet switching. And
you have Paul Barron in America, and then Donald Davies in the UK coming up with similar concepts.
Right. And I think they all sort of, once they all saw each other's research, I think they all kind of worked together to kind of form the standard that became packet switching.
Right. So packet switching, the switching concept comes from like circuit switching in telephone lines. So if you've ever seen, old movie where someone says, operator, give me Pennsylvania 14556. They're talking to an actual person whose job was to physically change the circuit that color was on such that they could connect to someone else on a free telephone line that didn't have anyone else transmitting on it, right? And that was like one of the initial inspirations for packet switching. But and even though circuit switching became automated eventually, early networking researchers knew that even that wasn't going to be fast enough because computers just transmit so much data, right? So it's actually closer to like the letter switching metaphor. Think about like the Pony Express, or just how mail works today, physical mail, where you send a letter. Say you're sending a letter from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, right? It's going to be routed through various cities as it goes west, right? Various mail carrying facilities. And it might get routed to one facility or the other based on external factors like how much traffic is there? Is there a bad storm? Each facility gets to make a choice about what is the most efficient path for that message, right? Yeah. Packets work exactly like that, where each individual packet, when it gets to a certain node in the network, that the router there is making a decision about what's the most efficient path to send this packet down so that we get this message to its IP address as fast as possible, right?
Sure.
And packets can even be sent out of order.
The header just sort of defines is like the
Right.
table of contents for the file that you're going to receive.
There's sort of different types of data in the header depending on what protocols you're using.
Yeah, and I think maybe to take that metaphor one step further, it's imagine I send you a note in the mail that says, "Hey Josh, I'm going to send you a letter." And then I send you that letter, but it's broken out into 3 different unique pieces of mail. And those 3 different unique pieces of mail are sent to you, but maybe not. They don't necessarily take the same route, and they don't necessarily get there at the same time on the same day.
Right.
But at some point, you will have the completed letter that you can read.
Right. And you might, if you're even using a more advanced, maybe you're a more advanced letter writer, we'll say, you might say, I'm going to keep sending you these messages until you respond and tell me that you've gotten them all and put them in the right order.
Letter.
And that's sort of how checksums work, right? And or that's how some internet protocols work to make sure that data is delivered intact, right? And it's this very elegant and simple system. We're probably failing to explain this because it's complicated in some ways, or maybe we're just, I don't know if we're doing a good job, but if you just take one thing from this, it's that the backbone of the internet was invented
1962
in like the 60s.
Well, it was conceived in 62. It wasn't actually or put into practice until 1969, which sort of takes us into the next step.
Right. And
so
go ahead. No.
So in 1969, all of this sort of research culminates in the creation of the Arpanet, which was 4 computers, not in the same location, networked together. And I think it was essentially the first transmission was the word login. Is that right?
Yeah. It was sent on October 29th, 1969 at 22:30 hours. And it was between UCLA and Stanford Research Institute.
And it really went well, didn't it?
Can I read you the quote?
Yeah.
We set up a telephone connection between us and the guys at SRI. We typed the L and we asked on the phone, "Did you see the L?" "Yes, we see the L," came the response. We typed the O and we asked, "Did you see the O?" "Yes, we see the O."
"Yes, we see the O."
Then we typed the G and the system crashed. Yet a revolution had begun.
Let's say the G. What's the G?
So, yeah, it failed, but, it failed.
But I mean, the proof of concept worked.
The proof of concept worked, and it certainly went on from there.
Yeah. So in 1969, this was still a government project, but by 1972, the ARPANET was demoed for the first time in public. And it expanded. I mean, it continued to grow over time.
More and more nodes, including like satellite links to Sweden and Norway and England.
Yep.
But importantly, these are all part of the ARPANET. These are just more and more hosts on the same network. But concurrently, other networks were being developed, like the National Physical Laboratory in the UK or the NPL, as well as many other networks like Cyclades or Merit that sprung up in the 70s, all sort of growing and researching networking concurrently.
Sure.
But then we were brought back to that same problem of, I would like to speak to a colleague who's working on another network, right?
Right. Josh, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Did you check your TCP IP settings?
I have to admit, Matt, that I had never once questioned what TCP/IP stood for until today.
I can't remember what TCP, Transmission Control Program.
It's the Transmission Control Protocol and the Internet Protocol, which were 2 things that came out of this period. You have all these different networks, and they have completely different designs. But we would like to be able to talk to each other, to connect the networks, right?
Right.
So we need a governing protocol to be able to send packets between these networks in a way that everyone can understand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where TCP and IP comes from. IP being as an IP address, so how you would address packets to particular computers. And then TCP is more like what we were talking about earlier with how do you make sure data gets transferred intact, right?
Yep.
And they did it.
Yeah, I think this is sort of where, I think in the creation of all of these individual networks, everybody kind of came up with, their own sort of like routing systems and that kind of thing. But I think eventually this is sort of where like, intermediary routing and international routing and all of these sort of like internet, like
interneting,
hubs,
if you will.
Interneting. All of this started to sort of coalesce, and the standards sort of kind of were created. And I think what's interesting, and I think what we'll sort of discuss in a few minutes, is that it's sort of like the architecture that they decided upon to be able to build the backbone of the internet was sort of like an open architecture and a non-authoritarian architecture. Like there
Right.
can't be this like overruling body controlling how this information is routed from one place to the other. I think because of the complexity of what happens on your computer and my computer, and those not necessarily knowing, like a computer on one end of things doesn't necessarily know what kind of computer or information network it's sending to on the other side. It's just sending
Right.
data.
No, that's the beauty and the elegance of the internet, right? And that's think about that word. It's just multiple networks being linked together, right? And these networks are the design is completely arbitrary. They can do whatever they want, basically, as long as they speak TCP/IP and a few other, basic protocols.
Yeah.
Anything goes, right? And like you're saying, no one's making rules about, other than TCP/IP. No one's saying like how the hardware has to work, how the routing has to work. Like it's sort of amazing.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing.
Especially, and we'll get to this, like, I mean, we all know this sort of intuitively, where it goes. If you think about it, like, it was born from frustration, but it was also, these people who built this technology, they had no idea where it was going to go. They just said, wouldn't it be nice to be able to connect these networks?
Sure.
And
if we could easily talk to and discuss and share information with our colleagues around the world.
And because everything was, there was all these different networks being developed. Like we couldn't say like, well, we can't force everyone to do the same thing. That just wouldn't be feasible. So it's half genius, half accident, right?
Yeah. But I think that, that very principle sort of underpins a lot of what we use. And we'll talk about it with the web, but email, like lots of these sort of like backbones of the internet are based off of the idea that like, here is a base level system. We don't care what you do with it, but this is how you're going to talk to things. Right.
Like the internet is very simple in a way, right?
Sure.
Like it's got TCP, it's got IP. It's just, the packet switching, that's key to all these networks. But otherwise it kind of doesn't matter how they're developed. It's just ones and zeros being transmitted, right? And you add things on top of that, like the domain name system, which made it easier to target data, right?
Right.
This being like what we're all used to punching in, like Google.com, right?
Well, that's an abstraction,
right? It's just a system
humans.
that connects like a human readable word to an IP address, right?
Right.
Right. But this was developed in the 80s. Now, of course, the internet proper, even as it's starting to become that in the mid 80s, was still in effect and more to the point, explicitly non-commercial. It was for researchers, for academics, and for military use.
Mm.
And it was like pretty much commercial use was strictly prohibited. There were some commercial networks that existed that offered email services, but they were their own networks, right?
Yep.
This all started to change, as more and more networks got connected to the internet, and there was just more and more interest towards the late 80s. And you actually had the birth of the first ISPs, these being like Telnet and CompuServe.
Prodigy.
Companies that offered email services to companies and even individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of the academic grip on the internet started to loosen around this time. And this is around the time when ARPA realized, oh, we sort of have done what we set out to do here. And in 1990, the Arpanet was actually decommissioned. And it had follow-ons, but basically this was the beginning of the end for the early internet, and the start of the next phase, right?
So what happens in 1989?
Well, Steve Jobs invents the World Wide Web.
No, that's it.
No, that's baloney. People say that sometimes. I think it's kind of ridiculous.
Just like Al Gore invented it.
It's a system of tubes.
It's a series of tubes.
Well, okay. So because, like I said, the internet was pretty important in academic circles and certain research institutions like CERN in Switzerland. And they had a pretty extensive network of documents that they would share amongst each other. And their documents were, at least initially, organized in a sort of tree-like structure. So as you would try to find a particular file, you would say, "Oh, go to this trunk and this branch, and then go to that branch and that branch." And you have to know what you were looking for to find anything, right? And it was extremely frustrating.
Right, with the convenience of the network where you can reach the computer you're looking for, but then at that point you then have to know where in the computer's directory structure those files actually live.
Right. But this all changed with one man with a cube.
A cube and a dream.
A man, a cube, a dream.
That's the name of the episode right there.
Who am I talking about, Matt?
I'm talking about Tim Berners-Lee. He's a computer scientist who was working for CERN at the time. And he had the idea to sort of allow people to structure the internet to make it easier to use, to provide information in an easier way. Instead of sort of digging through the computer's file structure, you'd allow people to author documents, link documents to other documents, link to files, all that kind of thing, in an easier to read, easier to navigate way.
Right. I mean, he took an existing idea of hypertext, it had been around since the 60s. He said, why don't I apply it to this problem so that we can flatten the structure, right? And let's just say any document can arbitrarily link to any other document. Now, that's revolutionary in and of itself. But he also he went a couple steps further, and he wrote the first web browser and the first web server using what?
He used the Netscape. This is the beginning of the Apple connection.
Yeah, here we go. Yeah. Of all the computers in the world, he had a Netscape. There's a famous picture of his cube with a little sticky note on it that says something like, "This is a server, do not turn off."
Right. One thing I thought was interesting is that Berners-Lee's proposal wasn't actually like a sanctioned CERN project.
He just sort of, I mean, okay.
He got approval, but he got approval to work on it on his own.
Well, okay. You and I know how this works, right? Where we're working in a business, right? And you have a frustration.
Working in a business every day.
Working 9 to 5.
Just trying to make the web work.
You have the frustration and you're like, I have an idea about how this could be done more efficiently or could make our lives easier, right?
Sure.
Like, you and I have done this, right? And it's like, sometimes you get sanctioned to do it and sometimes you just do it.
Right.
I mean, that's sort of how nerds work sometimes, right? It's just like, I don't know. I have an idea of how this could be better. I kind of don't care. I just want to do this thing. I totally buy that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I found an article that essentially said it wasn't an official CERN project, but he did get permission to work on it while working there.
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough. I mean, that's good. That's good. It's better than the alternative.
It was like Tim Berners-Lee's Dev Day.
It's Tim Berners-Lee's Dev Day. Yeah, and so this first browser was pretty primitive by today's standards, but it demonstrated what the web could, what came to be known as the World Wide Web could be. Another layer on top of the internet that was more accessible to researchers, but obviously going
really
from there,
anybody,
anybody, right? And pretty quickly after that, you get the web browsers.
Yeah, do you remember? Do you know what the first web browser was called?
We're talking about Mosaic.
No, I'm talking about Tim Berners-Lee's first web browser.
Oh, what was it called? Did it have a name?
World Wide Web.app.
.app?
Because it was a Next app.
Oh, because it was written in Netscape, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the first iteration was written in the object-oriented programming language of the Next operating system, right? Although apparently he went on to rewrite it in a more cross-platform language. I don't know what that language was, but World Wide Web.app. I love it.
It's pretty good.
Oh, so good.
I think you sort of you said it, but I think just thinking about like our little snail mail metaphor for packet switching. I think this is sort of like to extend that metaphor a little bit. Like imagine you finally get my letter and you assemble it, and then you can tap on a word and then find a whole nother letter behind that letter.
Right.
And access it instantly. And that metaphor breaks down immediately because the physical world doesn't work that way. And I think that's sort of the beauty of the sort of like the whole thing, the whole web is that like you now have the ability to access information instantaneously.
Right. And I want to really hit this hard because I don't know if we really outlined this strongly enough. The internet and the web are two different things. Right? They're basically synonymous these days, right? If we even think about them anymore, because it's mostly just about services and applications.
Instagram, right? TikTok.
Did you see this on Facebook?
Right.
Did you see that TikTok? Did you get that burrito?
I got that burrito.
from Grubhub. We don't really use it. I mean, this language is still in the lexicon, of course, but it's less and less, I'd say.
I agree. Maybe we're getting old, so maybe I don't know how the kids feel about the internet these days, or if it is just like.
But no one's going around saying, "Hey, did you see this internet video?" Right?
Right.
Or even this video on the internet. Who would say that, right?
I mean, if you're looking at E-Bomb's world, you'd say that.
Did you see the latest Flash animation?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm showing like how little I knew about this before we researched this topic. Because honestly, I didn't need to know about it because the internet is just part of everyday life. It's completely embedded now in culture. And it's just not something you have to think about.
Yeah.
Even if you are a technical person like I am. And so to go back and look at the roots of this stuff and say like, not only are these two separate concepts, they're two incredibly elegant concepts that got mashed together, right? Or built on top, one on top of the other, right?
Right.
Again, in this way, we're like, it wasn't planned. Nobody said, I'm doing this so that Facebook could be a thing someday.
Right.
Or so that I can completely like change culture.
Yeah.
In a profound way. No, I just want one computer to be able to talk to another. And I just want people to be able to find files.
Right. I want communication on the internet to be made easier. And here's an idea. Right.
And email has existed since the 60s, but it wasn't very easy to do until you got things like widespread TCP/IP adoption. And even then it was super hard to do. You basically had to like plan out the route of a message on the network. And that's where, DNS made that even easier. So like people had some inkling, at least researchers, the very lucky few who had access to these networks. They had some idea of how important this was because they could talk to their colleagues, they could send papers, they could send this information instantaneously, right?
Right.
But when you put this power into the hands of the general public, it just changes everything.
And I think sort of the secret power that we haven't discussed that the web sort of has built in is how easy it is to author.
Right.
To create a web page is as simple as writing text and knowing at the very least what an anchor tag is and how to format it. And I think maybe to our sort of follow up about Scratch, like the web is dead simple. Like it's like you can sit down and say, here is the one thing you need to know about how to make two things link to one another. But it's also kind of magical at the same time.
Totally.
Like how dead simple it is for you to be able to essentially author your own space on the internet.
Total virtual space, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like just carve out your own corner. And like a lot of these sort of social networking services were kind of based on that idea. But, like I see Amazon.com and I see memoryprotection.show, and I know that I can look at their source code and see how they built that page and vice versa. Like obviously like the backend programming is going to be way more complicated, but on the face of it, everything everybody sees is accessible to one another. I think that's also another secret power. Like I know that you and I both learned how to code websites by like looking at other people's websites that they coded.
As time has gone on, I sort of forget how magical that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're totally right. That's how most web developers learn how to do things, because it's all accessible. It's all in effect open source. At least the front end stuff is.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, when you're learning, that's all you don't need to know about that. You don't need to know what a CMS is. You don't need to know what PHP is. You don't need how to program anything. Right. I mean, and to be fair, like making an HTML page is programming. I'm not making a distinction between programming with a capital P and what people say web development is. It's all programming. Like, and I think that's sort of like barrier to entry being very low. Like maybe HTML is the sort of like, scratch of the web world, but that's also amazing because HTML is what powers literally everything we see on a web browser.
And that openness, that magic has had many threats over the years, right? Things like Microsoft and Internet Explorer becoming too dominant, things like the net neutrality constantly being in danger. I don't think these threats will ever go away, but I think it's also very astounding how it has survived them, right?
Right.
And that, yes, the internet and the web after it have led to, let us say, some questionable effects on society in recent years. Mm-hmm. It still is this magical, I'd say, hopeful thing that the more you look into it, the more you have to ask, like, how did this happen?
Yeah.
Like, how is this possible? You know, it's just this sort of, like I said, half genius, half accident. Like it sort of just happened. And also it was sort of planned, right? Yeah.
Now, not to take a step back, but just sort of thinking about like this week, I had the opportunity to actually just code up straight HTML.
Oh, it's so good.
It was incredible.
It's so good.
Like not having to think about like knowing that I was going to have to essentially like layer it into a CMS with the PHP afterward, but just like sitting down and structuring the document and like, I just like doing that puzzle solving in my head was just so gratifying. And like it felt like it felt when I was first learning.
Yeah.
And it's really amazing. And I think there's something to be said for just like that. So it's like that lone exercise of just go structure your document by itself.
This is what I've always been telling you, Matt. We should just get rid of CSS.
That's totally, dude.
Go back to the early days.
What a pile of garbage.
It's just lists of text on a page. It's beauty. It's beauty incarnate.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to say is that sort of then, and then going back, I got my document structure and then going back and layering in the visual aspect. And then once that was done, layering or integrating that into the CMS just really, really felt good.
Right.
Like in a way that hasn't felt really good in a really long time. And I mean, that's because I haven't really been doing it, but it was just nice to sort of like touch that piece of it again in a way
back to basics.
Yeah. That I just really haven't done in such a long time. Yeah. It just felt it felt powerful. Wow. I like, this is so simple, but it just like, I don't know. I don't know. No matter how complicated it gets, like what I'm writing, like the bare simple aspects of what I'm writing are what is going to be rendered to the user. That's some power.
It just works.
Boom.
Let's see.
I think just one last note on Tim.
Yep.
Tim BL. Tim after Tim left. Timbles. That's not nice.
Sir Tim Berners-Lee.
Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Yeah. What if we get him on the podcast one day and he finds out you called him Timbles?
I'll say it was a top level domain.
Anyway, when he left CERN, he went over to MIT and he founded the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, of which he is the chairman today. And the W.
That's that website that tells me how bad my website is.
Yeah, that's the website that essentially is the governing body for the web's principles. They sort of define new features, outline and document existing features and how they work on the front end, as well as how they hint at how they should be implemented by browsers, all that kind of thing. So if you don't know and you like the web stuff, you should check it out. Now you do.
So Tim Berners creates the first web browser and is quickly followed up by a bunch of copycats.
Yeah.
You may have heard of them. First, you got Mosaic with Mark Andreessen, right? And then he says, I can do better. He starts Netscape.
Yeah, Netscape.
And Netscape makes it incredibly easy and user-friendly to get on the internet, right? And to access web pages. So much so that they decided they're going to IPO. IPO, initial public offering. This IPO was completely buck wild.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it. Tell me, enlighten me, Josh.
So they started with some share price of like, I don't know, it's like $23 or something. And like by like midday it had doubled. And then by the end of the IPO, Netscape had a market capitalization of $2.7 billion.
What did they start out with? Nothing?
Well, nothing, because it's an initial public offering.
Well, I know, but it just meant the worth of the company itself.
I do not know. But that was, let us say, far more money than they had before. And it was far more money, and it was made so quickly that it really turned heads because, I mean, there were plenty of American corporations that had gotten to that point, but it had taken them like, say, 40 years, right?
So, I mean, now everybody gets an Aeron chair.
Now everyone gets an Aeron chair. Now, is Netscape making profits? No, but it has incredible growth because Netscape is very user-friendly and it basically increases internet usage by 1,000% overnight. And so people start saying, well, geez, I think this internet thing's going to be big.
It's really catching on.
I think it's so hot right now. And so you have this combination of the internet starting to get big and wow, these nerds who made a web browser just made almost $3 billion, right?
Yep.
Maybe I have an idea. Maybe I could do that too.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're at a bar and there's an angel investor next to them and says, well, I happen to have $3 million. Would you like it?
I've heard this internet's going to be big.
It's really hot right now. And this creates a short era of incredible speculation, which we now know as the .com bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And it all ends in tears. You know, it ends with Netscape basically destroyed, all of its market share being eaten up by another web browser, which came out a week after their IPO, that being Internet Explorer, which was
the best one.
The best one. It was arguably actually pretty good back then. It was, of course, pre-installed on Windows and pre-installed on Mac OS for a time.
That's right.
Because of a certain deal.
A save my company deal.
Yeah, save my company deal. That whole browser war leads to them getting sued for anti-competitive practices by various world governments. And it leads to the greatest high of the NASDAQ of the era. It gets to 5,000 points and then 2 years later has gone down to 1,000 and would not recover for 15 years. You know, it gave us classic cautionary tales like pets.com and Food Van. You'll never go to the grocery store again, Matt. The problem was most of these businesses were created by people who were not business people.
Sure. Who
were then given incredible amounts of money and did not know how to use it wisely.
Aeron chairs for all of us.
Aeron chairs for everyone. Third prize is a set of steak knives.
No, third prize is you're fired.
Yeah, you're right.
The second prize is a set of steak knives.
I would have gotten fired. I don't deserve the good leads.
What's the first prize?
It's a car. It's a new car.
Oh, right. Second prize, set of steak knives. Third prize, you're fired.
What's amazing, I think, about the tech bubble and its subsequent crash is the internet was fine. Like we you know, it really put a cold blanket on the economy for a while, but
sure.
The internet and the World Wide Web continued to develop. You know, obviously, I mean, I'm not telling listeners anything they don't know. You know, you start moving into the Web 2.0 era in the mid 2000s, and you get us to the era we're in now, which is called the
gateway to hell. I don't know.
The end of society, the twilight of man.
Yeah, I don't know. You get to the point where Donald Trump becomes president
because of mass misinformation campaigns via social networks.
I was going to say, like, that's not, you know, hyperbolic, but not untrue. Like, without the internet, I don't think that Donald Trump would be able to become the president of the United States. Like, so the internet, all of the sort of like love and affection we have for the internet, like, it's not all like, you know, positive. And of course, the internet can be used for really, really, really positive things, right?
The internet is a tool. It's neutral. It's net neutral, if you will.
That's fair.
It's not good or bad. It's, like I said, it's hopeful. Now, that doesn't mean that it turns out well in the end, right? It's just a tool. And we've seen in recent years how not only things like Donald Trump, but the omnipresence of social media in our lives is having an effect. Now, I think the count's still out. The count's not in on whether or not it's going to be a good effect, but I think an educated guess would say it's not great.
Well, I mean, I think it's that double-edged sword, right? Because there's going to be stuff that you like, right? Like, I think there's stuff that I definitely don't want to be watching on the internet, but I think there are things like Black Lives Matter. That's a movement that stemmed and gained like traction because of the internet. And on the opposite side, like Donald Trump's rise to power is because of the internet, right? Like, I think, like you said, it's neutral. It doesn't care. So both good things and terrible things can happen on the internet, and both good things and terrible things happen all the time on the internet.
Right. I mean, in the early 90s, when there started being more and more pressure to commercialize the internet, there were plenty of researchers who said, "What? No, no, that's a terrible idea. Let normies use it. No, this is a high-minded thing that is meant for research." Right.
Yeah.
That's what it was built to do, other than also launch nukes.
Sure. Well, we even talk about or report on in an earlier episode, and I'll find it and put it in the show notes, like Tim Berners-Lee is not happy with the way the direction of the web is going.
Right. And that's what I've been saying. Like, no one planned this, right?
Right.
No one, they didn't ask if they should. They just asked if they could, right?
It's chaos.
Chaos. Right? It's completely, no one could have predicted any of this. I mean, this is the internet, right? This is, if you could filter it down to one concept, it is chaos and complexity built on top of elegance.
Sure.
Right? It's an elegant, neutral tool that is a canal, a carrier for anything. Great, beautiful things, you know, teens learning about social justice because they're sharing ideas on a social network, right?
Yeah.
Angry white men sharing bad ideas on a Facebook group, right? It has both these things, right? And I don't know. I feel like we're, you know, in the early 90s, Congress stepped in a few different particular events to say, here's how the internet should be used. Here's how it can be used for commercial use. You know, here's what censorship should look like. You know, here's the FTC's role in this. And there have been iterations on that since, but I don't think anything as foundational as back then. And we might be coming to a new point where, you know, the technology has stabilized. Yes, there's fiber, there's new ways of transmitting data. There's new forms of interactions on the web, but it is sort of, I think, slowing down a bit in terms of rapid change, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And we're coming to a point, I think, where we're starting to ask more philosophical questions about the role of the internet and the web in our lives, right? To say, like, what should we keep letting this grow as it's been growing unchecked? And that extends to things like checking the power of the huge corporations that survived the .com bubble and the amount of power they have over people's lives. That extends to checking how much power social media has over both adult and children's psyches, you know? And I don't know. Listen, I tell you right now, there's not going to be very simple answers to those problems, right? But I think we're coming to a place where we're going to start asking that more, and not just people, but governments.
Yeah, I agree. The thought that bubbled up for me was sort of the internet, right? And I think it probably always has been. Like when we got our grubby little hands on it, it immediately became a reflection of who we are and who society is and what the culture is at the time.
Porn.
Yes. But I think with social media, I think we're seeing that amplified. So like it is hard to be on the internet sometimes because there are so many unpleasant things, but I think it's forcing us to reckon with some good aspects and some very bad aspects of our society in a much more public way,
in a very transparent way. Yeah, in the same way that a web page can be inspected. You know, so many the words that people say can be inspected by basically everyone on the internet, right? And that has good and bad effects.
Sure.
I don't. For all the bad things the internet has put into the world, especially in the last 4 to 5 years, I'm not sure that I would, given the choice, not have the internet, right? Because I feel like there are equally good things, right?
Yeah, on top of the fact that both of us make our living because the internet exists and we help to build it or build pieces of it, like. Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think that the world would be a more insular place without it. Like, look at how much more we know because people have put their stories out there.
Right. And the internet brings all that to the forefront, right? It helps us understand things that were happening all along. But now, people who didn't have a voice, didn't have a platform before, have somewhere to say that stuff, right?
Right.
And I think that has created a lot of tension and turmoil, but I think it's all worth it, right?
I agree. I mean, it's certainly like it.
I mean, of course it is, right? Because
it makes the world less simple, more complicated than it used to be,
right?
But knowing, I think also like you and I are sort of coming to terms with that in real time. Like the beginning parts of our lives had no internet,
right? Yeah. I mean, let's talk about that, right? Like. We are of two worlds, right? When I was a kid, there was no internet, certainly not accessible to me, right?
Right.
And then we had dial-up, right? Yeah, I got the AOL disc. Yeah. My mom signed us up. I remember getting kicked out of RuneScape when the phone was picked up.
Yeah. God, Mom.
And then we switched to broadband in the mid 2000s, pretty late, honestly. To using a company called Suscom.
Seems sus.
Suscom.net, which of course was bought by Comcast. When did you get on the internet?
So I got on the internet. Well, I think I've told the story about my dad's old K-Pro computer, the K-Pro 2000 or K-Pro 2. I can't remember which one, what it was, but this old like metal box with the integrated like 8-inch monochrome screen. And he had a modem for it. And I remember I was like, Dad, I want to.
How many bauds?
Oh, probably like 5.
5 bauds? Oh, that's
maybe it was like it was a really slow one. I don't remember. Bad. But so I was sort of like it was probably like the early 90s, 91, 92, maybe 93 because I think we got like an actual PC shortly thereafter. But I was like, Dad, I was reading about the web, right, or the internet. I want to get on the internet.
Really, you said that?
Yeah, I was like, Dad, I want to find out about this internet thing because he was into it, and we were looking at computers, and he wanted to buy a computer. So he like he essentially like dialed up a BBS and he said, "Here you go. You're on the internet." And I was like,
Go
"Well,
wild.
this isn't anything."
Yeah.
And so like I was like at first underwhelmed. I'm like, "Oh, I thought it was going to be like one of those sci-fi movies I was watching where like people were in like virtual reality." And, you know, I imagined something very different from the reality of the thing.
That tracks with what I know about you.
Yeah. So I finally figured out how to use these BBSs, and I found some other like telephone numbers and local BBSs, and I got a couple games, and I started to figure it out. It's like, oh, this is kind of neat. And then I think shortly thereafter, I can't remember, we bought up like my dad's like, okay, well, time for a new computer, because this K-Pro thing was from the 80s, and it was like, you know, 93, 94, I think. So we went out and bought a Packard Bell, and it had Windows 3.1 on it, and I think we bought a modem at the same time, and I think we got AOL or Prodigy or something. So I think it must have been AOL. But so then I started using AOL, and AOL was my first real sort of, I think, experience with what I think what people would more or less think of as the internet. Well, I mean, that existed with the K-Pro too, because it was still a modem. But and then my friends got AOL, and we started chatting on the internet. And then I figured out you could just load up Internet Explorer while you were connected to AOL and access the web. That was a big day for me.
I know.
This unbelievable. You could just like break outside the garden, just bypass that walled garden completely, and then you have all of this freedom.
I honestly don't have very many memories of my early use of like dial-up internet.
It's because there wasn't anything.
No. Most of my memories come from the broadband era, which was still horribly slow. Mm-hmm. I remember I used to, like, YouTube came around when I was in high school.
Yep.
And I used to try to watch like pirated anime on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And it would always be split into like 10-minute, three 10-minute parts each mm-hmm. episode. And you'd click on one and it would load up over the course of about 15 minutes. It would buffer, and then before you watched it, you would click on the other one in a new tab.
So you could buffer that
Get it started, yeah.
Yeah, smart.
That's how we did it. Now, of course, this is nominally an Apple News podcast, right? So let's talk about Apple and the web, their role in the web. Now, obviously, we already talked about the importance of the Next Cube and the invention mm-hmm. of the web,
right?
But let's talk about Apple proper.
Apple had a couple services over the years. I think we were just discussing AOL and CompuServe and those sort of like portal services. Apple had a couple. One of which was called Apple Link. Now, I didn't know anything about this.
No, I'd never heard of this.
But Apple Link is an online service, and they built it for dealers, third-party developers, and users. So it was a sort of like all-in-one shop.
Like me.
Yeah. So it was offered from 1986 to 1994, and I think it was sort of like, it was an internet portal kind of thing. It had email. I don't know what the hell else it had. But I bet you could access the web with the first web browser that ever shipped on the Mac.
Mac www.
Yeah. And that came out in 1992.
Oh, my God.
I want to see if we can get a hold of this and run it.
On what? Like System
7? I think System 7
System 7.
I bet you.
Yep. It ran on 6 and 7.
Yeah. I have to get some classic Macs then.
The story after that for a long time is basically Internet Explorer, right?
Well, the eWorld. So Apple eWorld, another sort of failed AOL-like portal.
A failed Apple internet service?
Ooh.
What?
So eWorld was like AOL. I think you could browse the web. It had news. It had these different portals like AOL did. Had email. But the sort of like novelty was that it was like a city. Right, you'd load it up, and there's these different buildings that you could go to and navigate to,
like a GeoCity.
GeoCity,
interesting.
And that didn't last too long. It cost you $9 a month.
Oh my God.
And that gave you 2 free hours of access time. And I don't know about you, but I remember the internet, like AOL, when you got AOL, you paid, like you got free hours, right? It's like they would give you the discs and you'd get like 100 free hours of AOL. But then you got to pay for the service after that, and you'd only get a certain amount of hours. But I do remember you could.
Oh my God, I forgot.
I think you could
Tears
just
and
like
rain. Jesus.
Chain those free trial discs over and over again to just boost your hours. So so the service is $8.95 a month for two free hours. Well, $8.95 a month, and you get 2 free hours. Additional access charges were $7.95 an hour from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and $4.95 an hour after that. $5 an hour.
An hour?
Yeah, and this Macworld article says while such prices seem high today, they were similar to other online services at the time, which I believe. But just think about that. The cost of getting on the internet, I think, was pretty expensive. So eWorld started in June of 1994. And
however, the dream did not last long.
Time to let the dream die. Kind of ended in 1996, 94 to 96. March of 96 closed on the 31st of the month. So,
and then after that, I'd say, other than third-party offerings like Netscape or even eventually OmniWeb.
Yeah, Apple took kind of a backstage approach to the internet,
especially when they needed their company to be bailed out by a certain other company from Redmond.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, all of the protocols were there for their computers to access and deal with and network with one another. But in terms of actually building services or software for people to access the web, they didn't really do anything until
2001.
Oh,
June of 2001, Don Melton started an internal project at Apple called Webkit.
Ooh,
this is a fork of the open source project KHTML, or the KDE HTML web renderer.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what eventually became, of course, WebKit, but also Safari, both desktop and mobile.
Right.
And WebKit is an open source project, and it's used by very many people, very many different companies and services like BlackBerry and Adobe. Steam even uses it now, the Kindle, Sony, even on some PlayStations. And of course, Google Chrome and Android used it for a time.
Well, Google Chrome, I mean, I don't know what the state of it is now, but Chrome essentially forked WebKit.
It did.
To build out what they use now.
Blink is a fork of WebKit.
Right, Blink. So now all of these Chrome-based browsers, of which includes Microsoft's successor to Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, uses Blink, which is a fork of WebKit, which Apple started.
And so basically everything is WebKit now, or WebKit based. I think even Oracle uses Blink now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure. I think Firefox still has their own thing going. Firefox, by the way, is what Netscape became. But I would argue that this is not Apple's greatest contribution to the web.
What do you got?
I would say greater still is the iPhone and the creation of the smartphone market, which basically allowed for the web to be accessed from anywhere, right?
Yeah.
On the go, from a pocket, no rules, just right. I mean, Chrome, WebKit, of course, is the foundation of mobile Safari as well. So WebKit's still important there. But just this idea that, the internet access had existed on phones before then, but full web rendering of like actual websites. And then, of course, the revolution in web design that it spurred on in terms of responsiveness.
Yep.
I think cannot be discounted.
Sure. I don't know that was Apple's doing. I don't know. I think maybe it's worth some research in terms of finding out who proposed the media query as a.
Well, I think you and I have argued on and off throughout the years about how much Apple actually cares about the web. Because on the one hand, Steve Jobs thought the web would be a sweet solution instead of the App Store.
I mean, he said that because he had to, because they didn't have an App Store solution.
But Apple has never been, other than, the open source efforts of the WebKit team, and, that's one team within Apple. I'd say Apple proper has always been somewhat hostile to the web because, brass tacks, like web applications are a competitor with native applications, right?
Sure.
And while you can argue that web applications do not feel as good as native applications, do not often work as well, are often resource hogs comparatively, I'd say a big part of that is also how much a particular platform is welcoming to web apps and web technologies.
Yeah, and I think that's a tough position to be in, right? Like they have their own interests, but they also maintain arguably the best used browser in the world, or at least, if you extrapolate that into its current incarnation.
Certainly the most profitable mobile browser.
Right. And I mean, I think for a while, Apple seemed more openly hostile to it. And I think in recent years, they have maybe not sort of like made it the same first-class citizen that apps are, but they have brought features like Apple Pay to the web. They are thinking about their platform on the web in a way that I think that they would not have done previous iterations of iOS.
And I just want to be clear, things like privacy protection tools in more recent iterations of Safari, while they are hostile to some web developers, I mark those as a good thing, right?
Agreed.
Those are protecting users from more malicious uses of the web, shall we say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not saying we should. I'm not trying to write them off completely. I'm just saying there's a sort of a tenuous relationship between Apple and the web.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it feels like that's always kind of been there, but maybe exacerbated more as web apps came to prominence. And there is that sort of like in the Apple community, that debate over, Electron versus native. And I think we can all feel like the burn of Electron apps as our laptops heat up to 1,000 degrees because we've got 6 of them going at the same time.
Right. But it's one of those things where it's like, are web apps bad because they're bad, or are they bad because the big companies like Apple are not putting their full force behind making them good, creating technologies that make them excellent, right? Like it's one thing to say like, well, yeah, you should just use UIKit or SwiftUI. And it's like, well, why can't we have something like that for the web from Apple, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of web development teams out there that want to be app development teams. Like just as an example, we loaded up the Target website, and the Target website is a fancy web application. Mm-hmm. And it was using so much memory, it was slowing the computer down.
Right.
Just a single page to render, it's whatever React app that they're running so that they could dynamically show her like shipping information and all this stuff. So she didn't have to wait. But the result is like a computer that should just be able to render a web page was essentially brought to its knees because Target's web dev team wanted to build a native application-like experience.
It wasn't global ready.
But I think the sort of like the downside of the thing, I think even sometimes web development teams are hostile to web browsers. Like it's just a page with HTML and CSS, and you essentially like killed the computer.
Well, I think that's part of what I'm talking about, though. Is like it's not just that Apple could provide these tools, but the tools that Apple provide often shape behaviors of developers. Mm-hmm. When you offer unified UI for something, not to mention the whole disunification of UI concepts on the web, right? Mm-hmm. And we've talked about that in previous episodes. RE the web, RE game design, right? As well. Right. But I don't know. That's just, we're not in a universe where that's where things went. And that's part, that's going back to the openness of the web, and just like how you can just sort of do whatever you want, right? And that anyone can make anything. That's again, another double-edged sword, where it's like, it's beautiful in its openness, and it also could be frustrating because it allows people to make things which are not very usable, right? In certain cases. Well, folks, that's going to do it for June 2001. If you thought we missed something, you're wrong. But go ahead.
We got it in one.
Go ahead and tell us about it on Twitter using the handle @MemProShow. Or you could send us an email using the top-level-domain.com, the secondary level domain Gmail, and the handle Memory Protection Show. That's all at once, memoryprotectionshow@gmail.com. Just punch that into Lycos.
eWorld.
I don't know. You can render our website with your engine of choice using the address memoryprotection.show.
Boom.
Remember, kids.
Whitehouse.com.
Whitehouse.com. I was thinking the same thing. Do we want to do recommendations, or do we just want to do Karnov?
We could just follow up with Karnov.
Okay. Listen, we're clearing the decks this month because there's important things to talk about.
Yeah. Last month I took shit all over the Nintendo game Karnov, despite not having played the game in 15, 20 years, probably longer than that, probably 25 years. I don't know.
But you had played it.
I had played it previously, yeah.
So you somewhat knew from whence you spoke.
Yeah, I had the memory of not enjoying it. So I went back to the Mac. I played through Karnov.
You played through the entire game.
I played through the entire game. And to be fair, not in one sitting. I save stated. Like, I'm not precious about that anymore. Like,
did you do that because you felt like you had to?
Played through the entire game?
No, the save stating.
Oh, I just knew I wasn't going to have enough time in a single sitting to do it. And
so it wasn't like you were like save stating every, like reloading every death. You're just saying that was to sort of expedite the experience.
To be fair, there was some of that because I didn't have to play through a whole level again.
Well, I think that says something about the design of the game, though, right?
Yeah, it total and complete garbage.
Tell us what you really think, Matt.
And the game is bad. 2 reasons the game is bad.
Okay.
The jumping. Have you played Karnov?
No, but I when you say the jumping, I think I can imagine what you're talking about because there's plenty of examples on the NES of platformers that, let us say, did not reach the heights of Super Mario.
Yeah, and I mean I get it. Like programming a jump arc is probably pretty tough if you've never done it before. I couldn't probably do it from scratch. So
listen, it's really easy. You let them move midair and you do coyote time. That's all it takes. Come on, people.
The jumping is if you jump, you just press the jump button. Just jump up and down. You can't move.
Oh, it's straight up.
So there's no sort of like midair. But if you're moving and press the jump button, you can move in midair.
Oh, so you have to be pretty particular about it.
Yeah, if you walk off a ledge, you fall straight down very slowly until you hit the ground below it or fall into a pit.
For those listening at home, Matt, who is Karnov?
He's a Russian circus performer.
He's a shirtless guy, right?
Yeah, and he spits fireball. With a mustache, he spits fireballs. The second problem is when you hit enemies, sometimes they indicate that you've hit them, but most of the time they don't. And all of the enemies' movements are so erratic, it doesn't make any sense. There's no way to sort of like, I'm sure that if I played this game as a kid and I played it like 50 times, I'd know exactly how all the enemies move, but none of it makes any sense. My favorite part of the game was flying. and swimming.
Ooh.
The two times in the game that Karnov isn't actually moving the way he's supposed to move. The flying and the swimming.
When Karnov slips slips the bounds of the earth, right?
Yeah.
And is freed from gravity.
So another sort of infuriating thing, and again, like I didn't have a manual, so the manual would have solved this problem, but there's an inventory system. Along the bottom of the screen, there's all these icons, and you can pick up all of the different inventory items. But for the first couple levels, I couldn't figure out how to select them. And then I realized is that the inventory items change whenever you press the left and right buttons to move.
What?
Yes.
No.
For real, dude. So if I wanted to, say, use a ladder,
you had to just sort of nudge it.
The area that I needed to use the ladder was to the right of me, but the selector was to the right of the ladder. I had to go past the area where I needed to place the ladder, hit the back button, the number of times I needed to be able to put the icon on the ladder and put Karnov in the right spot.
It's like,
and then I had to adjust it again, because if I needed to put the ladder to the right of him, I needed to take an extra step back so I could right button again to point him in the right direction and then use the ladder.
That's amazing. It's like you're playing like a block pushing puzzle in parallel.
Yeah. And like on top of all of the weird erratic enemy movement, and there at some point there's these mummies that are just like fireball sponges, and I probably spent like a half an hour trying to get past this one spot with two mummies, and I had to watch like a let's play because I was like, what the hell do I do? And you just have to kill the mummies, but they take like 50 hits.
Oh, it's like Resident Evil. What happens?
So this particular section is you fall into a pit where there is a mummy. The mummies only shoot when you shoot them. So you have to shoot and dodge and shoot and dodge and jump. Dodging, by dodging, I mean jump. And then you have to, there's like this weird, like once you've killed that mummy, you have to use a ladder. And there's this weird little gate up on a ledge that you use the ladder to get to. So you go to the gate, but the gate is nothing. But when you get close to the gate or touch the gate, a platform suddenly appears to the left of that on top of your ladder. So you can't use it to get down. And then another mummy appears. You then have to kill that mummy. Once that mummy's done for, you drop down, and one of the blocks that was on the platform below you, if you step on it, disappears. And then you fall down, slowly to the platform below where you can access the rest of the level. But before you can access the rest of the level, there's two more mummies already shooting at you with some erratic bats. And it was that's where I started to get really mad at the game.
But you still, you struggled through. You still beat it.
Well, once I figured out what the mummies just took a lot of hits. But it doesn't make any sense. There's nothing in the game that indicates like kill these two mummies and then the spot on the floor will open up for you. Because nothing else in the game is like that.
I mean, that's just like NES era, moon logic, right?
Yeah. So, Aaron, I know you love Karnov, or I understand that you have some affection for Karnov, but it's a bad game and nobody should like it, and you're wrong.
Well, okay. Send
us some follow up.
What's your rating of Karnov?
What's my rating scale?
We use our usual scale. Matt and I have a rating scale, by the way. I don't know if you've ever explained it on the show.
Oh no. Okay. So the rating scale is it's either a scale of bad or good, right?
No, it's very bad to very good.
Very bad, good, or very good. There's nothing in the middle.
I was just trying to explain this to someone the other day, and they're like, "What's in the middle?" And I said, "We've literally never." Nothing. We don't have that. There's no middle, because I always have to have an opinion about something. Right.
So it's fine. It's not it's not an opinion.
So Karnov, very good.
Very bad.
Oh, very bad. That's our highest honor. What are our highest honors?
Yeah. I mean, it's something. I if I had to play it on a cartridge, and I think I probably didn't make it past the second level when I played it originally.
Oh, I wouldn't have. No.
Oh, also, yes. I mean, I cheated the hell out of this game because I also had turbo on. I put turbo on the fire. So which to be fair is something I would have done with my NES Advantage back in the day. Had a turbo button. I would have used the turbo for sure. So I don't necessarily consider that one cheating. The save stating is maybe my only.
I think that's acceptable. I think the way you played it did not create the badness of the game. Shall we say?
The game was bad despite the conveniences I laid out for myself.
Exactly.
It wasn't a fun challenge. It was just tedious and frustrating. Aaron, tell us why you like Karnov. Let the saga continue. And maybe you're talking about the arcade game, which I've never played. And if that's the case,
I don't think he is. But
okay,
we will follow up. Tune in next month.
To
hear the exciting next episode of
the Karnov saga.
The Karnov saga. Yes. I am a hypertext typer. I type hypertext. I am the most hypertext typer who ever typed to hypertext. That's good too. I like that. I just came up with that on the spot.
Boom.
I wrote it on my Netscape.
Hypertext text typer.